Do you rather see a real live person than a dead TV image? So Jonathan, we're running 12 minutes late. No, we aren't.
Yeah.
8 minutes late.
So you have until 4:15.
Oh, you're giving me an extra 10 minutes?
Yes.
In which to fail?
Yes, exactly.
All right, so how do we start?
I don't know. I gave your handouts and I have here your material. So just guide me what you want me to do and what.
That's Cindy Shy. Cindy, is that you?
Hello, Bob.
Wow, you look good on a Friday. All right, so how are we going to do this? Well, I was expecting about 180,000, so it's a slightly larger crowd, a smaller crowd. Well, I don't know where to start. So they've seen this, the list of all those quotes I came up with?
Yeah, I get
Not
that.
quotes.
Yeah, so I couldn't print it out myself.
And I have your material here.
Let me start by saying this. First of all, I'm really pleased to be at the conference, and I wish I was there. I heard it was a great party last night, and I couldn't be there but for my shoulder. So, with those quotes, I would want to suggest that the history of media literacy goes way further back than any of us might imagine. Let me let my producer go. You're good to go? Thank you, Jeff. All right, break a leg. So, and you know, when you think about McLuhan said that almost anything was a medium. So that scratching, chisel marks on a stone or on the Ten Commandments, that would definitely be media for McLuhan. McLuhan said pencils were media, or was a medium. He said even the line on the back of a woman's fishnet stockings could be a line of medium. So anything can be media, and when we study media, that can be media literacy. So it's a very broad potential definition. But I think even the things I came up with there about leisure, they're very relevant to what Cynthia would often call a danger cluck. Cynthia,
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
I mean, a lot of them are warning about the horrors of going to the Roman Colosseum and seeing the games and so on. So, okay, first of all, there's this history that goes back to the 3rd or 4th century BC that we know about. That's Roman and Greek. I mean, gosh knows that we're Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon probably complaining about their kids looking at rocks for too long. Then we come up to more recent history, and I would recommend that Hugo Munsterberg quote, which I think I put up early on, and it's toward the end of my book where I quote a lot of those things from. And so there's Munsterberg referring to the importance of educating people for what he called the photoplay. As best I know, I could be wrong, I'm not a film historian, that the term film and movies didn't even exist in 1911, 1916 when that book, he doubtlessly said it earlier because that's the publication date of the book called The Photoplay. And then there's good work that Renee and her people did with that timeline that dates at least to the 50s. But it's interesting, I was looking at the first thing that I really published in the field that I think I sent some copies up that they got there by, oh, it's there, wow, by UPS. I was told not to call it UPS, I was told to call it UPS on this coast. But on the back side, which I didn't Xerox, was resources in media education. And it's very interesting to look at, since I wrote this 22 years ago, what I thought were the resources in media education at the time. So under organizations, it hasn't changed that much. Association for Media Literacy in Ontario with Barry Duncan as the leader, and some of you may know that Barry just passed away, I think, in the last 8 months to a year. And Cindy, you knew Barry, right?
Sure.
And what's interesting, you can't hear?
No, go ahead. Yes.
No, you can't hear, but go ahead. Okay. So I have a tape of an interview I did with Barry some time ago, and I think the Canadians would actually be interested. It's like an hour or 2 hour interview with Barry Duncan. Then the next name is Elizabeth Toman, who I believe is at the conference and Center for Media and Values. And that's like my next publication in media literacy circles, right? And Elizabeth goes back further than I, of course. And then there's the rest of this thing on the back of that thing was Strategies for Media Literacy with Kathleen Tyner, who a number of us know. And Kathleen, in fact, Rebecca, I think I introduced you to Kathleen when we were in Denver.
We're doing some work together.
Then books and pamphlets. So you got someone named Brown who published in 1991. Then Amy Dorr, who's the first person I called after I got my doctorate in 1984. I was at the program for social ecology at UC Irvine, and I knew that Amy Dorr knew something about this thing called media literacy. I knew what it must mean, but I didn't know where to place it. So I called. Amy was at UCLA, and now I think she's like the vice chancellor at UCLA, and she explained to me what media literacy was. Then there's Patricia Greenfield, whose name is next. Then, of course, Len Masterman, that dates to 1980, and a number of us have met Len. Now, this is an important point I would make, is it used to be much more so that an American, by American I mean US, because the Canadians get upset when we call America, because they believe they're in America too, and they're right. At North American, or excuse me, US media literacy conferences, we would almost have to import Barry Duncan and Len Masterman, and these people, and people from Australia. David Constein was here, and Robin Quinn, and at the time wearing is almost like the tie that Robin Quinn gave me years ago. And we'd import these people from other countries because we didn't know what we were doing. And I would argue, to some degree, we're doing a lot better, and I'm going to make a little bit more of that in a moment. But and I think particularly Renee's position now at the Harrington School is an instantiation of the fact that we've come some distance in media literacy. I don't think that they would have necessarily appointed someone like Renee, who's best known for media literacy work, into the position she's in if this was 8 or 10 years ago. So, and there are other names on here. Yeah, 1981. Then the Singers, who some of us know from Yale, 1981. Critical Viewing, 1980. Boy, it's all happening in 1980, isn't it? Okay, so what else can I tell you? Well, there have been problems. In fact, Renee Hobbs and I first met when we were both fellows, I guess we were called Annenberg Fellows at the University of Pennsylvania. It was the first year of the program. Elihu Katz was our supervisor. Kathy Hall Jameson was running the school, and they decided to have an Annenberg Scholars Program. And for the very first year of it, they decided that media literacy would be the focus. And my proposal, which they ended up funding, was called Obstacles to Media Literacy Education in the United States. Which gets me back to a point that just left my mind for a second, which was the Australians. Because I want to emphasize that, to my mind, I thought this 10, 15, 20 years ago. I haven't stayed abreast of what the Australians are doing now, but they're like eons ahead of us. At least they were 20 years ago, because they were teaching kindergartners semiotics. They didn't call it semiotics, but it was better than them telling it was semiotics, because the average kindergartner or George W. Bush or yours truly would fade out if someone said semiotics. I wouldn't know what they were talking about until 20 years ago when I was in my mid-40s or 30s or something. And the way they do this is they show 5-year-olds, for example, a couple of different kinds of containers, glass containers that one might put different kinds of alcoholic beverages in. You probably couldn't do that in the United States. There'd be a grievance case against you. But so one of them is a beer mug. 5-year-olds sort of know that that has some class status attached to it. And another one is like a champagne glass, and another one's a wine glass. And each of them has telegraph. It has symbiotic or semiotic meaning. So you're showing kids that, like, even these glasses that adults drink wine or champagne or beer from have implied social class. You know, not a specific social class necessarily, but they do. And so they're making them aware of, in this case, if we want to stretch it, the medium of a glass container as something we could be literate about, that we could, maybe not deconstruct, but we could understand it. And I thought, man, the Australians are far ahead of us. And of course, they've not only required and mandated media literacy training in their country for, I think, 15 years. I haven't been down there to see it, but I think they really make good on it. Cindy, better than anybody in the room there that I recognize, would probably know. The Canadians put it into effect around 1987, and I think there was some teeth in that too, which is to say that they mandated and they actually did something. Now, we have it mandated in here in New Jersey. In fact, they came to my center, and they came to the New Jersey Media Literacy Project, both of which I created, for us to help them. And you got media literacy on the books verbatim. Now, Frank Baker, some of you may know, Frank and I did a study that got actually republished almost anything I had published, which was a careful study, which Frank did most of the work, and he did the lion's share of the work. What am I talking about? And he looked at every state's standards and we tried to deduce whether there was something that legitimately could be called media literacy. In other words, media that were being analyzed that transcended or went beyond print media. And sure enough, we found in all but, interestingly, all but like Kansas, where they're still trying to kick Darwin out of the schools, we were able to find evidence that kids were being taught about radio and television and film, not just about print media. And that was sort of important. And we could only find in 7 or 8 states at the time. And I'm pretty sure I did send the article up by UPS yesterday, so it's up there someplace. I don't know if they can Xerox it in time. We were able to find 7 or 8 states like New Jersey that literally said media literacy, but these mandates are important to know about. It's mandated in New Jersey, but there are no teeth in it. So unless you teach to the test, which is also a problem that we know about, then we don't know if anybody's doing it. In fact, my younger son was like in 4th grade. We went to back to school night, my wife and I asked her whether she had the new language arts literacy standards, which I knew were new in New Jersey new standards. And she said, yeah, they're right here. You know, she was excited about it, you know. She said, they're right here. And she put her arm back and pulled out this big stack that was like, it was this thick. It was like 2 reams of paper. And it was still in its shrink wrap, which told me that she hadn't even opened it, right? Now, down in Maryland, and Renee Hobbs would know better than I, they've mandated, I think it's maybe Maryland and Virginia, and of course, Renee's had some real inroads into Maryland with the Discovery Channel. So, and that's an important thing to point out. Much as I think a lot of us find it anathema to require that kids get taught, or that teaching is to the test, we live in a very, a culture which is motivated by extrinsic factors like money and grades, and not intrinsic factors like just enjoying yourself or learning something or becoming really good at something for the sake of becoming good at it. I mean, I learned a lot of this at the hands of Csikszentmihalyi, who is known for flow, and I always learned a lot about intrinsic motivation from the time I went to Santa Cruz. So I'm blathering on for enough time that we probably should go to questions before too long. So it's been a sort of a long, slow slog. But things changed. When I was in Denver, I saw so many handouts from so many places, and then Cindy's sitting in the room, and what she's done with curriculum development is amazing. And across all kinds of fields, including the environment, which we were talking about a number of times. And I see all these different schools that have, sophisticated handouts, and there's one publisher that's got 10 different books with the word media literacy on them. I mean, I haven't been to the Detroit conference. I'd recommend to NAMLE that they not hold their next conference in Detroit in August again. And I don't think it's a good choice. But we're in Philly next time, and we'll have a better turnout even than in Denver, I think. So I think the field's coming a long way, and it's come a long way just in the few years that I've been involved with it for 20-odd years, and they have been odd years. But I think things are getting better all the time. It sounds like a Beatles song now. And let's just go to questions or thoughts or comments. I don't want
We
to
have 5 minutes for questions.
Sure. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm from Johns Hopkins. I have a question, I guess, about this idea, sort of bringing it to some recent developments and this conflict, at least that I've experienced, between news literacy practitioners and media literacy practitioners, and major funding that is being directed towards only one or the other, with very little crossover. And I guess I'm thinking specifically of the McCormick Foundation, which is very, very adamant that they do not fund media literacy education. And I find that at cross purposes to what we're all trying to do, but I'm just wondering if you can sort of, if you have any light to shed on why this divide exists and how to lessen it, how to sort of bring it back together.
Let me try and repeat back what I think you're raising, because I honestly, the sound in the room isn't perfect, so, and my hearing isn't perfect, so I think I got about a third of what you said, but I think, tell me if this is the gist of where you were going, is why is the funding screwed up and what can we do about it? Is that sort of? A little bit of what you said?
More of the dichotomy between news literacy practitioners and media literacy. I don't know if you can repeat it into the...
Maybe someone closer to the mic. Is that
the dichotomy between the news literacy and the media literacy.
what was the first word before media?
News literacy.
Well, let me just kind of answer. Let me just say what I'm going to say, because I really, we shouldn't waste time on the fact that I can't hear and need hearing aids. All I would say, one critical thing I would say that's unfortunate about the funding in media literacy, and I would say it's true about a lot of things, it often needs to be tied to a health issue, something that people are worried about, where they think that media literacy is going to get kids to stop smoking or stop drinking or stop having dangerous sex. And I've been asked to consult on that. My colleague in the room, Rebecca Reynolds, knows our joint colleague, Catherine Green, who's been getting very well funded in terms of using media literacy strategies to get people to stop smoking and stop drinking. She's even got one now to get people to be more careful with tanning beds and tanning salons. So she's found, now let me put it this way, Steve Chafee, before he died, a very well-known guy in the field, said that health communication was a gold mine in search of a theory. So he was saying there's a lot of money in DEMDAR, NIMH, and NSF and those places, and I always found it unfortunate. You can't tie it so well to the National Endowment for the Humanities. It's just a harder sell. There must be other questions or thoughts or hostilities or something. In the back there? Or no, that guy's just recording. Cindy?
Yes. A lot of us have been talking about assessment and how you assess the effectiveness of media literacy with students in the classroom in ways that will convince educators, educational leaders, administrators, the government and state departments of ed, that media literacy is a critical skill. So can you speak to how can we assess this, especially when media literacy is not about everybody coming to the same conclusion or having one right answer, but more.
Well, you just nailed that. It's a great question. It's the question that haunts our field. It's the question or a set of questions that go with it that we slowly have to try and answer, and then we paint ourselves in the corner by trying to come out with an answer, it seems to me, because the answer that funders and other people want to hear and the government wants to hear is some simplistic thing, an answer that we don't want to give, because it's like a black and white thing, and we're talking about the humanities, which are wonderful and every bit as important as the sciences. And let me just show you, speaking of dichotomies, when I was at Chicago, history was a social science, and trust me, those people are historians. And they're every bit as good, but they do the same thing as historians here at Rutgers and a lot of other schools, but at Rutgers it's considered a humanity. So I guess I would point out that science and the humanities aren't that far separate. Something else I would point out in terms of interdisciplinarity and these things, if you go back to Greek times, and if you go back to the founding of my university in 1766, if you look at the curriculum there, at those days, everything was interdisciplinary. I mean, they had a few things that broke out, chemistry or biology, but a person's education in ancient Greek times or in ancient US times before the country was founded was more interdisciplinary. Now, let me try and focus on Cindy's question before I get knocked off into the netherworld here.
It's very soon, yeah.
Yeah, I know, John. Well, you can try and operationalize these variables. The problem is that the culture doesn't put much import on people knowing the humanities, unless it's, to be able to speak French so you can be a Fulbright scholar or so you can score well. I don't know. Cindy, how would you answer your own question? Seriously, how would you answer? No, it's a good question.
I think that's I think the two biggest challenges for media literacy in K-12 education, because I think there's lots of other realms that maybe don't share the same challenge, but is doing that kind of assessment and getting it built into teacher education.
Can I raise just one
Sure.
comment on that? And I wonder, I'm very curious to talk to you after about your thoughts on this, because one of the things that I've been working on is an evaluation framework for the games that are created by students in
Sure.
the project that I'm studying. So they're designing and developing interactive web games. And I've drawn on, interestingly enough, I have drawn on the work of Neuendorf in
great.
media, in journalism, media
Yeah.
studies, and her work in content analysis. And so I've developed a quantitative content analysis framework for evaluating the artifacts.
Right.
And I'm using content analysis basically as my kind of like quantitative methodology
Yeah.
for developing assessments to evaluate artifacts.
Yeah.
So it's it would be a challenge of training educators on the coding scheme and establishing.
Can I jump in? Let me just jump in,
Yeah.
because John's going to kill us in a minute anyway. Something I learned a long time ago as a graduate student, and I go back to Gordon Allport, a famous psychologist some of us would know. He said, among other people, and some of it's actually in chapter 3, I think, of my first book, The Television and the Quality of Life, is anything can be measured. Anything can be measured, anything can be operationalized. It's not so easy sometimes to operationalize these phenomena in the humanities, but it's doable. And the problem, some of the problem is that we have colleagues in the social sciences or in the humanities who will dig their heels in at the idea that you're going to operationalize anything that they do, because they find, there are 3 Ps usually. They find science phallocentric, patriarchal, and paternalistic. And I understand where they're coming from. I can deconstruct with the rest of them, but that's another hump we have to get over, is the kind of split between the humanities and the social sciences and the sciences. But I interrupted you, Rebecca. But I was just saying, you can measure this stuff. It's just not easy. Oh, and then the harder part, and I'm dealing with people in climate science now since I last saw you, Cynthia, is that it's so hard to communicate research findings even in the social sciences through the media. I mean, I've had my stuff covered all over the world, but one of the reasons it got as much attention all over the world when my first book came out is they got something completely wrong, something counterintuitive, which they thought my studies showed that television made people really sick. I'm not kidding. So there were headlines in Korea and Kenya and Japan and France that said, TV will make you sick. And I wish the internet had been invented by then, because it would have sold more books. But I called George Gerbner and I said, George, I've been working on these data for 17 years and I don't have that thick a skin yet. It's upsetting me. It's getting new. And CNN is telling everybody every half hour, because it was headline news, that TV makes you sick. And George said one thing to me. He said, Bob, are they spelling your name right? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, just sit back and enjoy it. But it was funny, but it speaks to, I mean, if you think we have trouble communicating our ideas, try being an atmospheric global warming scientist these days. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that it's so easy to do. A lot of our stuff is nuanced. And when Cindy asks the question about how you're going to operationalize qualitative phenomena, and you can operationalize them qualitatively, but you can do it quantitatively. There's no question, not only a named question in my mind, it's been demonstrated forever. But the mindset of the media is a very short attention span. They have the attention span of a gnat, which actually has a pretty long attention span compared to network anchors, from what I can tell. So we're probably supposed to wind up. Jonathan, you've been it's nice to see all of you, and sometime I want to hear feedback. And then Jonathan, I think he's doing something in this room next, am I right?
Yeah.
Can I actually hang out for this or not?
We'll try. I need to use the computer, so we'll try to do it.
All right.
I'll keep you in, but...
I just don't want them looking at my face anymore.